I learned from Super Science Me, Mr. Chair, that the #1 cause of death in the United States is heart attack. Following in a close rank are things such as lung cancer, and what you can add to that list are things like diabetes, tuberculosis, and other things that we think on government side are easily preventable, given the effectiveness of our model we would want to present to you coming from our bench. We think that there are two particular problems that we want to solve at government bench. The first problem is that there is an ever-increasing demand for medical resources. We think that right now there's an increasing demand for organs or procedures such as dialysis. But the second problem, there is an increasing shortage of these particular goods. So right now, quote unquote, people aren't dying fast enough for these organs to come in, and we don't have enough resources to pay for such dialysis and procedures that people need. How do we fix this problem? We're going to fix this problem by allowing the allocation of these goods based on how healthy or how unhealthy you are in your particular lifestyle. How are we going to do this? Here are our prompts. First, we're going to have a survey before the procedure is done, right? So pre-procedure, there are going to be surveys, background checks, and other medical things to determine whether or not you are an unhealthy individual or whether or not you are living an unhealthy lifestyle. Second, a committee of experts will be designed to determine whether or not you are really living an unhealthy lifestyle. And this will be determined by a particular ratings, right? The committee will also determine a particular number and rating that will be given to you. So if you are someone who smokes like 4 packs of cigarettes a week, ladies and gentlemen, you will be given a particular number that is corresponding to that. All other things such as how much you exercise or how often you are and the amount of food you intake are things that will also be taken into consideration. Please sit down. Third, we think that this sort of allocation is also going to determine how you are, where you are on the list. So if there are certain things or certain organs that you need, how you will be placed on priority will be determined by that particular rating and that number that is given. Fourth, we think that we will allow you to go to private hospitals. Fifth, we think that people who are willing to rehabilitate willingly, that sort of factor is also going to be taken into consideration on how the number is generated. So your rating will also determine whether or not you want to go to rehab. But it does not completely absolve you from said sins, right? 6, we will promote and make sure that rehab is something that is present. But 7, this debate takes place in the first one.
So in an ideal state, if the state had all resources available to them, would you still deprioritize unhealthy lifestyles?
Yeah, because that doesn't really make sense. Because if we had infinite amount of resources, then we would happily make sure that everybody gets these sorts of things that are present at the very end of the day. But the reality is, Mr. Chairman, this is the frame, it's not like that. 2 arguments from government bench. First, how we think the state has a legitimacy to make sure that they allocate these goods in this particular manner. And this argument is going to prove why this procedure is morally permissible. And second, how we have an optimal allocation of resources. Let's talk about the first idea. Why do we think this is morally permissible? 2 reasons. First, because rights always come with corresponding responsibilities. Who are the actors that we're talking about? We're talking about individuals who habitually smoke, right? Because the policy only affects you if you have a really big number or big rating when it comes to you being unhealthy, which means that more often than not, you're an individual who smokes habitually, who drinks habitually, who lives a particular unhealthy lifestyle. We think that right now, a certain dynamic exists between individuals and the state. What is that dynamic? The dynamic is that there is a reasonable expectation of how you balance those freedoms with particular responsibilities that you have with them, right? That's why government continuously puts on cigarette labels that you have to smoke in a responsible manner. That's why government always puts pictures in places like Malaysia of how things might end up if you continue smoking in a habitual manner. We think that because there exists a dynamic of balance, we think that the state has every sort of recognition and has every sort of permissibility to be able to determine that these are the consequences of your actions. There are people who are more deserving, people who handle these responsibilities in a fairer manner, and we think that these people ought to be prioritized as opposed to you. The parallel here would be like skydiving, right, ladies and gentlemen? Skydiving is something that is free, that you can choose to do, but the state doesn't pay for your harness, it doesn't pay for your rope, and it doesn't pay for other things to make sure that everything else is done at the end of the day. So we think that the consequences of said actions are taken care of by yourself. That's why state has legitimacy to do so. But secondly, allocating it in an optimal duty is also the responsibility of the state. You have to understand that we live in a state wherein there are multiple people, then there are multiple demands for particular organs, right? We have to acknowledge that at the start, everyone is equal, and at the start, everyone is placed in the same pedestal as everyone else. But your choices determine how the state treats you at the end of the day. So, if you're someone who is irresponsible, and you yourself know that habitually smoking and habitually drinking and partaking in these sorts of vices will lead to this scenario, we We think it's unfair for the state to prioritize you over the other individual who has been living in a responsible manner, who has been living in a manner that is good and something that is an expectation. As a result, Mr. Chair, you, as the individual who has been smoking and drinking habitually, causes a third-party harm. You prevent the individuals who have been living in a responsible manner from having the chance to get these resources. We think that's a harm. Second argument, sit down. Why do we allow the optimal allocation of resources? And here's where the pragmatics come in. Two reasons why this happens. First, it allows a better sense of the difference. You have to understand right now that smoking and alcohol are things that undergo this procedure called hyperbolic discounting. What is that? Right now, most people, when they see cigarettes, they would want to smoke or alcohol because they see that the short-term benefit is much more tangible than the long-term harm. The long-term harm, ladies and gentlemen, they have yet to perceive and they cannot perceive because it's so far away and it's intangible. How do we fix that model? We make sure that they realize that this is what's going to happen to you, that you cannot come to our public hospitals after you have taken this procedure and you've determined you've been living in an unhealthy manner. So we make it more apparent that these are the consequences of your actions. And when these consequences become more and more apparent and have teeth, ladies and gentlemen, we think the likelihood of individuals smoking and drinking in a habitual manner will marginally decrease. We think that's a benefit because less people are going to die of heart attack, less people are going to die of smoke, of lung cancer, and all other sorts of things. We think that's something that the government will fight for. But second, there's a clear long-term benefit when we invest in individuals who are more healthy. What does this mean? Because right now, we're talking about individuals who are prioritized because they're living in a healthy manner. So the state knows, ladies and gentlemen, yes, here, that these individuals are people who are going to live in the long term because they are responsible, because they are individuals who the state can trust and know that if we give you an organ, if we give you a second chance, if we save you, you are going to be continuously be a responsible citizen at the very end of the day. We think that that sort of investment has more returns, which allows for the better and optimal allocation of goods. What do we prove from my speech? We prove two things. One, it's legitimate for the state to do so, but second,